DivineZ 1 Fated Clash is finally releasing in English, and today we're going to break down the top 10 decks from this format. The data used for this top 10 is provided by VG Paradox, sourcing from tournaments that occurred in the first 2 months of the set's release in the Japanese format. This set introduced a variety of powerful new tools that any deck can use, legacy support for old decks, as well as a plethora of strong new cards with the old new divine skills, powerful abilities that you can use once per game. When looking at these lists, keep in mind that these are ones from before the Shiranui and Luard restrictions, and will not be featuring any of the decks supported by the Shop Tourney promo pack released in March, which will release in June for English. Results from after the restriction and new PR pack will be looked over in the DivineZ 2 breakdown in the future. In 10th place, we have Greedon, with this list coming from a top 8 finish at the Sendai Deluxe in March. Greedon received an incredibly powerful new tool in Aracre, a Desire Devil that uses 3 energy to call any other Desire Devil from your soul. As you generate 3 energy every turn in Standard now, you can generally expect yourself to use this skill easily at least 3 times a game. This particular list typically likes to call Goman from the soul every turn after Greedon Masks puts him back, putting an annoying 2-card guard restrict on your opponent for the whole turn every turn from turn 3 onwards. This strategy is particularly effective thanks to Moshin, a card from set 13, Flight of Chakrabarti, which not only pops out as an attacker when you don't have one, but can even contribute to the attack count while your opponent is under the guard restrict too. As hand quality can be an issue in this deck, this list uses CDA and Rising Dragon to establish a soul while drawing cards at the same time. In 9th place, we have the finally released MyGO, one of the Bang Dream collab decks featured in Fated Clash. This deck focuses around the Bang Dream band called MyGO, who are made more powerful when you have them all on the field and are further enhanced by the orders this deck plays. The Grade 1 Vanguard Tomori Takamatsu searches your deck for the Haruhikage order, which, when you play it, calls a Crychick from your deck. The Crychick of choice is usually Sakiko Togawa, which can only be called by this order without retiring herself, and once you do call or ride something that is not a Crychick, which is virtually everything else in the deck, she goes to Soul to draw you 1. The Grade 2 Tomori allows you to search your top 7 for another MyGO card when you ride over her, including both orders and units. One of the best MyGO cards you can have is Anon, who on call counterblasts 1 to check top 5 for another MyGO unit and call it, and after she attacks she binds herself to draw you a card, essentially generating 2 cards of advantage in 1. Her targets include Rana, who gains plus 5k every time she attacks for the turn at the cost of binding herself at the end of the turn, and gains the ability to drive check when stood by one of your music order skills as long as your opponent is on grade 3 or greater. She's a great source of pressure and is oftentimes your strongest attacker. One of the strongest grade 1 members is Soyo, who gives plus 5k to anything for the turn when placed, including your Vanguard, and when she boosts any MyGO, she gives it the 2-card guard restrict for that battle, but binds herself at the end of turn. I think you might see the pattern here. None of these cards bind themselves after their skill use and they wait to see the end of turn, so even if you restand them, you can reuse these effects. She's a good card behind either one of your attackers, as she's often making a 23k column with Anon, which is annoying to 2-card guard, or putting more pressure on your drive checking Rana. Finally, we have Taki, who is a 10k shield either from hand or field at the cost of binding herself, and a Soul Blast 1 top 3 MyGO order searcher, but it's best not to waste your soul on this skill unless things are super dire. The game plan of this deck is to build a board of members early, aggress while generating resources from Anon, and once you ride the grade 3 Tomori, she lets you Soul Blast 1 to call 2 of your bound band members back, triggering their on-play skills. Unless your opponent isn't grade 3 yet, in which case she only calls 1 back instead. This is why all of the members binding themselves works really well with what the grade 3 wants to do. Didn't draw into your orders? No problem, as her second skill can set them for you. These usually being either Hekiten Banso, which can stand a MyGO unit or column depending on your opponent's grade when your Vanguard attacks, usually being the Rana column. Once you have a full board of all members though, you're gonna be usually choosing Mayoyuta instead, allowing you to discard 1 after your Vanguard attacks to restand your entire board of rearguards, and if your opponent's on grade 3 or greater, they all get a plus 5k power pump too. This was just a brief overview of what the deck does using the 4th place list from Sendai Deluxe, but ratios often do look like this, usually with changes in the order counts and the Crychick amounts. I actually got 3rd with MyGO in WGP Nagoya last year, so if you're curious to learn more intricate things about the deck, let me know in the comments below and I can cover them in more detail in the future. Before we move on to the 8th spot, I want to give some special shoutouts to a couple of decks that didn't quite make the cut. This includes Leonorn, who still found some success in Indonesia, placing 3rd, Charmant, which is particularly popular in Japan and secured a top 8 finish in Sendai, Morphonica, which is the other Bang Dream collab deck featured in this set, which is decent on its own, but is borderline invincible in the Shiranui matchup in particular, and the one divine skill user that didn't make it in this top 10, Chris Rain. but still having found success at one of the community-hosted VGCS tournaments. Moving to 8th place, we have an example of a top-tier deck that just needed something strong and generic to fill those last 4 slots of the 50-card main deck, and that is Youthberk. Already a turn 3 powerhouse of a deck, all it needed is a little bit more draw power to find its pieces, and the generic Biscotti offers exactly that, letting you ditch her for your Rhine deck cost to Energy Blast 3 and draw a card, or guard with her to do the same. She has a powerful skill when you Persona Ride as well, letting you find key attackers off the top 3 in the main phase, or stack the top card of your deck if you call her mid-battle phase. And Youth found good success this season, placing top 16 in Sendai. In 7th place is the brand new deck from Fated Clash that we feature that isn't a collab, and that is Direful Dolls. Direful Dolls have technically always existed in Standard, but never under one cohesive strategy and boss unit. Android makes the magic happen, letting you counterblast 1 to call Workoroid Race Direful Doll named cards from your soul equal to your opponent's Vanguard's grade, and if you call 3 or more, he gains an extra drive. This is very important since it means you're not using hand to build a board, and triple drive even on a 21k column is annoying to guard too. Even if it's just 13k, you can't just drop a 15k to 2 to pass because there are risks involved. What makes this deck the most unique is his second skill though, where whenever he's attacked, he allows you to call a Workoroid Direful Doll from your bind zone to guard with and gives it plus 5k shield every single time. This has 2 important implications. 1, he's incredibly tanky, especially against multi-attack decks like Shiranui, and 2, he makes games last very long due to this, and in Japan, if you time out in Swiss rounds, both players suffer a double loss. It's for the second reason that this deck is only ranked in 7th, because if it wasn't for that time rule, it might be seen a lot higher. The deck is particularly recommended to those that like resource management, as you're constantly cycling through your drop, soul, rears, and bind zones thanks to cards like Liberata and Pelagia. The grade 1 ride line Serenella helps find dolls to chuck into your soul early, and Griselda lets you put any dolls you've drawn into your soul so you can call them out with Android as well. The deck even has energy-based multi-attack in Providenza, so you actually barely use Counterblast in this deck while cycling through your cards. In 6th, we can see the deck that has put up the biggest fight to Shiranui since the release of Triple Drive Booster, Prisms. Being able to adjust a deck build to match the format is a great strength of this deck, and as the amount of Shiranui's decreases, especially after the restriction, you'll find a lot of lists looking like this one that won the 8th Ultimate Championship. Brescia is not only what we call a gun cycler, being one that draws you a card when discarded for ride deck or guarded with, but also lets you buff your units and bouncing your rear guards back to hand if you call her after Persona Riding too. This lets you reuse Petronil to deck thin and add more beefy Prism shields to your hand. Olpire is another target, where you can even use his first skill to get a Persona Ride back, bounce him to hand, and then use his defensive skill right after. Overall, Prisms are looking to be a great pick into this format. Before we jump into our remaining top 5, if you've been enjoying this video so far, I'd greatly appreciate you liking it and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I'm pushing for 100k subscribers and it's definitely not possible without your support. If you want a deeper dive into these decks, I actually do first-person perspective fight videos as exclusive videos for YouTube channel members, so if you want to show some extra support, consider becoming a YouTube channel member and unlocking a whole plethora of other videos on top. Back to the video. In the 5th place, we finally begin activating our divine skills, starting with the one that always wants to fire as early as possible, Welstra Blitz Arms. This deck is an absolute beast in bursting down opponents with high firepower, constant retiring, and now even the risk of taking forced damage thanks to the new product order Euriante. Not only does it let you gain 3 energy when set and also draw a card, but it puts a time bomb on your opponent that next turn they're eating a force damage if they're at 4 or less, and on top of that losing 10k power and losing a rearguard. The new Welstra himself is a beast as well. His new ride line lets you confirm search all your products, and his Instafire divine skill lets you immediately set 2 different ones and operate one, which allows you to immediately start filling your board thanks to Lubiltal. The main differences come down to whether you want to go all in on the burst or commit harder to farming hand and be able to last in endurance against long game decks like Rezael and Eva in the future. This first build features more of the latter, opting for a high count of Bergina, as she allows you to operate in main phase, which lets you fill the board more and convert your soul to card draw. Another build focuses more on Trolle, where her purpose is more to just maximize the amount of battle phase operates so that you're constantly setting your opponent's Vanguard to negative power while wiping their board out. The deck takes a bit of practice if you're coming into it fresh to most efficiently make use of the operate combos, so it's definitely the deck to play for people that are into this kind of game plan. In 4th place brings us to our protagonist deck that is looking to be a much stronger tournament performer compared to last season's counterpart, Rezael. This deck is partially the reason wondering why this video couldn't come out earlier, as we were missing the confirmation of a very important component of this deck's English release, Sergaon. You'll be seeing this generic grade 1 in many killer decks going forward, but more on that later. Rezael is a very generic deck that can be built in various ways, so whenever you're trying to min-max it with expensive staples or just want to build it as a budget deck just to play with a boss unit, anything is possible. This is thanks to the fact that his main skill allows you to call 2 cards from your drop with different grades, but those grades have to add up to the same or less than the amount of damage you have. So if you're at 3, you can call a grade 2 and a 1, or a grade 3 and a 0, but while you're at 5, you can even do 5 attacks, calling a 3 and a 2 to your front row. This skill doesn't specify anything but the grades, so his future potential is also incredibly high. For the set 1 build, you'll often see what is called the Order package, featuring Wisdom of Beginning that cleared the world, or just Wisdom for short, which allows you to pay a counterblast to draw 2 cards and call 2 from hand, or discard 2 if you don't. This is often used as early as turn 2 to build early momentum in conjunction with Tithfault, who, when called by a non-unit ability, such as an Order, lets you Soul Blast 1 to check top 5 and call a card from among them that's equal to or lower than your Vanguard, or add an Order to your hand. This means you not only get crazy momentum from as early as turn 2, but she also helps to dig for the aforementioned Sergaon, who is a 13k booster as long as you either have more rears than your opponent or played an Order this turn, and after boosting, retires himself to check top 2 and add one of them to your hand. This is basically Iva's first skill on a rearguard body, making this one of the absolute best cards in Keter Sanctuary in my opinion. You can use him in conjunction with Cadwalla, where you then have 2 rears that retire themselves to add cards to your hand, which works great with Rezael's effect to call back a column from your drop, netting you a total of 4 cards in hand from 2 cards on board that you keep reusing. This ability to cycle through resources and have powerful attackers is one of Rezael's many strengths, and we haven't even mentioned his powerful and generic Divine skill, one that can create the miracle of turning any 6 damage check trigger into a heal while preventing deck out by returning all your criticals from drop back into your deck. Rezael will continue to develop and likely become stronger in the future, so it's a deck that I personally have very high hopes for going into the next few sets. And finally, we reach our top 3. You might have realized that one of the faded ones is missing so far, and that is of course the fan favorite Varga Dragres. Wisho knocked it out of the park, designing not only a lovable character, but also a deck that can be virtually built almost entirely from one set alone, being an excellent choice for new and returning players. Varga is a powerful aggro deck that centers around a Vanguard that restands while wiping out both players' front rows, except you have a bunch of cards that self-retire or do something off of being retired, so the only one losing out is your opponent. The Divine skill needs your opponent to be on a grade 3 or greater Vanguard and be on 4 or more damage, so deck lists that lean hard into aggro like this one are quite common, being able to ensure 2 to 3 attacks per turn from turn 1 going second or turn 2 going first onwards, and with almost every card being able to convert into a draw as well. This lets you not only dig for Persona and important combo pieces like Shura for late game, but also make sure you're putting pressure on your opponent with the risk of being in the Divine skill range as well. However, if you want to take things slower and just work with a threat of the Divine skill, the mid-range version of the deck popped up a fair bit, and I personally quite enjoyed myself as well, choosing to up the amount of cyclers and choosing to use fronts as well, as personally, if you have so many cards that draw in this deck, if I'm drawing triggers, I want them to at least bring me a huge shield. Varga, much like Rezael, can utilize a lot of generics easily, so try out a bunch of different approaches and see what works best. The second best deck in this format, you've probably guessed it, is good old Luard. Rezael isn't the only one that gets to use the reliable piece-digging doggo Sergaon, as it being a grade 1 that self-retires is a huge boost for Luard's ritual count as well. This is still the deck that now has a fantastic early game, is able to use Biscotti for bonus draw to not worry about being aggroed down, and finishes up with a scaling late game pressure which either ends in multi-attacks through Drag Driver and Morfessa, or Big Guard Restrict from Drag Strider. Once the Sergaon restriction comes in for Luard, it'll definitely drop down a few ranks, but for now, this is still one of the decks to beat, much like it was in the previous sets format as well. And of course, if we're talking about Luard here, you already know, yes, in first place, Shiranui was the most topping deck in Japan during this season. This was of course still with the Shojodoji ride line still available and Drag Veda still usable at the time, and ever since the restriction came into effect, the deck has lost a lot of that early game consistency, but still continues to be a relatively common pick into tournaments, despite being a lot more susceptible to aggression and losing pieces this way. Turns out if you give a deck with an incredible late game a super strong early game package, these kind of things do tend to happen. game. There are some variations between Shiranui versions though, as in this version you see the so-called Gun Cycler Falheart being played for similar reasons Biscotti is in Luard, but the first place Sendai list featured a list that has been showing up more in parts of Asia other than Japan, which uses Esperlidia as a way to make sure you can still get multi-attacks in even if your opponent completely plays around Dominate for the first strike turn, as both of the Shiranui exclusive restanders need to have seen one of your Dominate units attacking. This way, your first strike turn firepower is still very potent. I personally did think that Shiranui wouldn't rank as number 1 anymore in this meta, as Varga in particular is a very common and quite well matched deck into this matchup. Dolls can defend against most of the rapid fire attacks, and Luard can often farm enough to survive, but the early pressure from the Shojodoji Radline and Stealth Engine still helped Shiranui seal the first place in this top 10. And with that, those are the top 10 best decks of the Fated Clash format. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and you can check any lists or more data on the VG Paradox website from Vanguard tournaments worldwide. If you liked the video, please do give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. Otherwise, that'll be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.